Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Who likes ads? I hate ads interrupting my favorite shows. In an effort to keep the show ad-free, we have set up a Patreon account. The show will always be free to listen to, but unfortunately, it isn't free to produce. If you would like to donate to the show and help us out, please go to www.patreon.com/The Unseen Paranormal Podcast. That is patreon.com/The Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we're chatting with paranormal author, researcher, and journalist Sam Baltrusis. Sam has authored over a dozen books covering Salem, New England, and Massachusetts ghost and high strangeness. You may recognize Sam from his appearances on shows such as Haunted USA, Haunted Encounters, A Haunting, and recently on Fright Club with the Ghost Brothers and Jack Osborne. You can find his books on Amazon and at his website, sambaltrusis.com. Hey Sam, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. I just started a new job as a TV producer, so I've been really busy working. The show is a Haunting, which I've been on before. So I've been working on that the past few weeks, and it's been an amazing experience.
Oh, that's awesome. So you get to hear all the stories and see all the stories before they actually go on TV.
Yep. Yeah, what's good about it is, like reaching out to these people, having been on the show and having had an attachment that nearly killed me, I can kind of serve as a counselor almost to help them walk them through what's going on.
Yeah. So is it getting back to normal since COVID is kind of passed, or?
Yeah, I find so during the COVID period, I was working at a hotel actually, and because of COVID, everything kind of shut down. So there was a period where I was like sitting at home for a couple of weeks, and the type of person that I am, I'm like, you know what, I got to write. So I started writing a book, and I ended up writing my book, Haunted Hotels in New England, and which is fitting because I actually worked at several haunted hotels. And then I started, just focusing on like looking at my career and trying to go into television, which is what I did back in the day. I was a TV producer back in the 90s and early 2000s. So I wanted to kind of like, get back into it and hopefully get back into paranormal themed television. And I was very lucky to be able to do that with this gig with The Haunting.
Yeah, and so you kind of started out pretty much having paranormal encounters your entire life.
Yeah, I mean, I was like the kid from The Shining. I was like Danny Torrance. I had experiences, and they were so terrifying to me as a child that I put on paranormal blinders. And I remember, like hiding under my covers because the spirits would, like I could see them, and
right.
like just like the kid from The Sixth Sense, like I see dead people. Well, I did too, and so I'm a clairvoyant, so I actually see the spirits, and some of the spirits that I was seeing at a young age were, some of them were good spirits. They weren't bad, but I interpreted it as bad. So I tried my best to tune it out, and I managed to do that for a long time. I went. In my teens, I would have experiences, and I would try to like mark it off as it explainable. I was walking in Washington Square Park when I lived in New York City, and I had like what felt like a hand grab my leg as I was walking by the park, and it was definitely, it felt like a human hand. And I looked down, and there was nobody there. And it turns out that that's where a lot of people died from tuberculosis. That's where they were buried in a mass grave. So it still happened. I still had visitations, and I would just try to shrug it off. I knew it was paranormal, but I just wanted to make him go away. And if I didn't think about it, I wouldn't give him, the energy to be able to reach out to me. So it wasn't until like later on in life where I said, you know what, and I worked as a journalist for many years, so I would interview people, mainly celebrities, and I'm like, what if I actually interview the ghosts? And when I started doing that and like communicating with them, that's when it all kind of changed for me. I'm like, I can actually interview the ghosts like I interview people, and that kind of became like what I do as a clairvoyant, as an author. I don't have like, it's not a typical like where you have like a spirit box and the spirits talk in the spirit box to you, or like an EVP recorder.
Right.
But as a clairvoyant, I do get messages from them, and it's up to me to kind of dig for the information to back up what they're trying to tell me.
Yeah, and that definitely would help with writing all these books and going and researching the stuff and actually going to the places. You spoke about haunted hotels and working in some of those haunted hotels, and you have a new book that's coming out later on this year that you've written about the haunted hotels. What's some of the most interesting experiences that you've had in hotels?
Well, so I actually had, so my book Haunted Hotels came out, but I'm actually doing a podcast on about the book. I have been to like what is considered the most haunted, like the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, and I do think it's extremely haunted, but it's not haunted in the Shining kind of way. It's kind of haunted. It's actually a happy haunting at the Stanley Hotel. But I've also worked at locations that were supposedly not haunted, like a hotel that I can't publicly name in Salem, that I had probably one of my most terrifying experiences doing the overnight shifts at this boutique hotel. So there was like this shadow that kind of appeared in the lobby that I saw, and it would actually kind of like wait for the elevator, and I was like what is this? Like this black mass in the middle of the lobby, and it actually waited for the elevator, goes into the elevator, and then it goes down to the basement. Now this hotel was a new hotel, new in the sense that the building was a very old building, but the hotel recently took over this old building and turned it into like a boutique hotel. And anyway, so it was under construction. So I thought maybe it was somehow related to the construction. And what's also interesting about the basement is you needed a special code to be able to go down into the basement. So I'm like, wait, something is like not right here. I ended up like calling the elevator, going down to kind of check out, like maybe it was something like a dust coming up from below. And then I heard what sounded like footsteps coming, like kind of walking, and I can actually, because there was like sawdust on the ground, and you can actually see what looked like footsteps. So I figured it was somebody, it was a person,
right?
And I kind of followed the footsteps with my flashlight, and I ended up hearing what sounded like a moaning noise, and not a good way. It was like someone may have been like hurt or was in severe pain. So I'm like, maybe this is, because I know that this building had at one point had tunnels connecting like the different businesses in downtown Salem. So I thought maybe it was like maybe a next door business, and somehow like someone was hurt next door. So I run upstairs to check on the next door business, which actually is a bookstore. And I look in the window, and this was like 3 a.m. So it wasn't like no one should have been up, at the hotel.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going outside and looking in the bookstore's window, and I see what has haunted me for years. It was a man wearing a hat with red glowing eyes. And
wow,
even talking about it kind of like freaks me out because it was so scary. And I was connecting with this entity or this spirit. And first of all, I was like, oh my God, like he was like looking at me, and I'm like, can you see me? And I was like telepathically connecting with this entity, and he's like, yes, I can see you. And we were like kind of communicating, and we're like, our eyes were connected. And some people were like, well, why did you like just run away? And I'm like, I was like frozen. I was frozen in fear, but also kind of like in trance at the same time. Like, I can't believe I'm seeing this happen. And then the thing just kind of darted to the back of the store, and I was just standing there just in shock. And then I heard what sounded like a woman screaming down the way, which like it came from like an alley in Salem. And I ran down to the alley, and there was nobody there. So it was just like this weird series of events. I ended up actually leaving that hotel a few days later because I just couldn't go to a location where I just saw it. And it was featured on the show called Paranormal Night Shift that I was on, and I recounted the incident. And that was around the time that I found out that I was related to people that I've been talking about for years. I've been a tour guide in Salem, Massachusetts for about 10 years. And it turns out that I'm related to the Putnam family, who were the major accusers during the Salem witch trials.
Wow.
And so my first instinct was maybe it was related, like maybe it was a family member, like maybe it was a person, and that was very, very angry with red eyes. But the more I looked into it, I think that it was something that still haunts me. It actually kind of still follows me around too. And, I'm trying to connect to this energy to see what it wanted from me. And it's actually said over and over again that it wanted energy. So it's like an energy vampire. And I'm glad I left the hotel, but it really did kind of change my tune. Like you think that certain hotels are haunted, and people are like, where's this hotel? Where's this hotel? I'm like, it's not the hotel that's haunted. It's me that's haunted. Like it was going for me.
Yeah.
So I still did work at a hotel after, and I worked at another hotel that ended up having a crime scene that was pretty close. That was connecting with one of the victims, and actually was Whitey Bulger, who was a notorious gangster in South Boston. It was his dumping ground. So, no matter where I go, I just like somehow find the ghost, or the ghosts find me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stop working at a hotel, specifically the overnight shift, because I just seem to kind of like stumble on these terrifying situations. And, I do find it fascinating. I do think it's kind of like my purpose in life to tell these stories. So, I kind of do it out of, if I can see them and I can communicate with them, so I want to tell a story. But when you bump into something like a man wearing a hat with red glowing eyes, it does change you.
Right. Yeah, because the first thought would be of any normal person would be, is it evil? Is it demonic? Is it that term's thrown around a lot?
Yeah.
But, is it something malevolent that has bad intentions?
Yeah, I'm in the school. I think a lot of people want to claim that everything is demonic, and I don't think that this entity was going to hurt me. I felt like it was like more of like a watcher. It was kind of watching me, and I didn't feel like I was in imminent danger, but it still was terrifying.
Right.
And so I think calling it demonic would not be right. Interdimensional, maybe. I still kind of in the school that it may be related to my family somehow, whether it's a victim of the Salem witch trials or it's actually one of my family members that were perpetrators that just, after this happened in 1692, it's been 300 years. It's bound to kind of morph into like a monster over 300 years.
Right.
So I think it may have been a person.
Yeah. And it's like I've talked about here on the show before that, you can have 10 people in the same room and everybody see the same apparition. Everybody will see it differently as well.
Right.
I had Mike Ricksecker on, and he had a really interesting theory about that we all vibrate on a slightly different frequency. And so that's why we would see things differently. And so maybe that's just the way that you saw it. It maybe didn't intend to scare you with the red eyes or whatever, but that's just how you saw it for whatever reason.
Yeah, and looking back on it, like actually Mike Ricksecker and I have talked a lot about this entity. He was like saying, like, what do you think it was? Like my first instinct actually was not that it was like a shadow person, or even that the man with a hat, as it's called, but it was wearing a hat. My first thoughts were it was a relative, and it was somehow like looking at me, like, hey, like, you have to help me kind of thing. And, and I, as someone who's related to not only the Putnam family, but to a lot of nefarious characters throughout history, including Lizzie Borden. And that's another doozy that my mother actually uncovered doing research on Ancestry.com. So related to the Putnams and the Borden family. And I just feel this responsibility kind of, I don't know, like to give them postmortem peace, if that makes any sense,
yeah.
or to tell their story and to tell it correctly was sort of like a family lens. Now that I know Lizzie Borden's my cousin, I'm going to try to, do I think she killed her father and her stepmother? I think she did, but I also think that, I think that she was for the most part, a good person, and she spent her whole life kind of like in the public eye being, ridiculed for, even though she was acquitted. So
right.
I think that these people were people, and they were complicated. And my goal really is to kind of give them their due and kind of like tell their story as compassionately as possible without making it a black or white. Because when I first studied Lizzie Borden, I automatically kind of viewed her as this like crazed, axe wielding woman. And now that I know she's my cousin, I'm like, oh my gosh, it completely rocked my world. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy family ties, especially as infamous as that story is. in the general public, let alone in the paranormal world.
Yeah, it's weird, and also the fact that I've been writing about this for years, and it's like, oh, and by the way, my mother knows me, and she's my mother's Southern, so she's like, Sam, I think we burned witches. I'm like, Mom, they were hanged, and what were their names? And she was like the Ghoul family and the Putnams. I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, Mom, those are the bad guys. And my mom was really emotional about it too, because I think, just like me, she's compassionate, and she doesn't want to think that maybe we're related to the bad guys. We want to be related to the good guys if that's possible. And,
right.
Unfortunately we're not. We're related to all the bad guys.
Yeah. When I was growing up, my dad did his family tree, and this was before Ancestry and all that stuff, but he was able to trace it back to medieval England, and he stopped whenever he found out one of his ancestors was actually the axe-wielding executioner. And he's like, the further he went back, the worse it got. So I think anybody you look at your ancestry, close enough, you'll find some nefarious, not so good people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of what's interesting about that is like this is my grandfather who I feel like I got the gift from. I mean, he was actually the first person I saw. He passed when I was really young, and I would actually communicate with my grandfather as a young boy after he was dead. So he was actually my first ghost encounter. And I find it kind of ironic that he's also the tie to all these family members as well. So it's been kind of like a eureka moment where everything kind of makes sense in my life now. And I'm like, because I was going kind of, I wouldn't say blindly, but just kind of moving forward and not really knowing why I was heading in this direction.
Right.
And now I look back, I'm like, it's a journey that I was supposed to take, even though I didn't know where I was going. I just kind of went there.
Being in the paranormal world long enough, you start to pay attention to all these weird synchronicities and all this stuff. And I find common threads between a lot of the guests that I have on, or locations that I've, investigated or researched. And yeah, it just all seems to tie together eventually. It just all starts to come together like, okay, yeah, this is why I'm supposed to be doing this.
I mean, even people that you meet in the field too, they kind of come in your life when you need them. Whether it's like Mike Ricksecker. I mean, I've been friendly with Mike, but when I had the encounter with the man with the hat, that's when we really started to talk. Or Dave Schrader, or other people who I've kind of known in the periphery, but when I really needed them out in the field, we became good friends. So it's like one of those like, not only is it the ghosts come in your life when you need them, but also the people come into your life when you need them as well.
Right. So with doing the research and writing the book on the haunted hotels, what do you think causes hotels to have this kind of lore? Because a lot of hotels, even like some of the smaller, no-tail motels that you think wouldn't be haunted, tend to be haunted. And even the higher class, like the Biltmore, or even like, I live in the Nashville area, so like Opryland Hotel is a famous hotel, and there's stories of it being haunted. Did anything in your research like point to maybe why those places have a tendency to be haunted?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sheer numbers of people who come in and out of the hotels. I mean, like, if you having worked there, it's shocking how many people actually walk into the hotel. And it's also shocking how many people die in hotels and you don't hear it reported. People do get, like when you hear about someone fake committing suicide, you really look at where it happens. A lot of times it's at a hotel. And I mean, that's something we don't talk about much, and I don't really talk about it much in my book, but I do think there's more death than that's actually reported, because I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you want to keep it hush hush, like, oh, so-and-so had a drug overdose in this room, or that kind of thing. Because it really, like, you don't want to sleep in a room where someone died 2 days before. It's not good for business. And so I think the sheer numbers of people over the years, and also other like nefarious activities. And there's a lot of these hotels, they were like during the Roaring 20s, and they were also part of the Depression in the 30s. And sometimes during the 30s, there was prohibition, like during that era, which kind of, there was a lot of party under, like kind of like hush hush party going on, and people were dying from drug overdoses. There were murders. There were a lot of things going along with the Prohibition era, and they would keep it hush hush because it was against the law. I mean, and also too, there was like gangster activity. So I think a lot of it has to do with the location and kind of keep trying to keep it secret. But the ghosts don't keep secrets, like
right,
the ghosts will if it's haunting a location, I mean, even just like the hotel that I worked at, that actually is going to be where I'm doing the Mass Paracon. I worked there for about 6 months, and actually I worked there during the beginnings of COVID, and I had this visitation of a woman wearing like a 70s nightgown, and it turns out that's where Whitey Bulger actually dumped his victims, like right outside of the hotel, and I didn't know that. So I think the spirits kind of they stick around because they want you to tell their story, and sometimes when you actually tell their story and acknowledge them, they can cross to the light. So that's kind of I'm finding that that's kind of my role when it comes to the spirits. It's like once I acknowledge them, they can actually, I guess, pass on to heaven or pass on to the fifth dimension or whatever you want to call it, because they have their story acknowledged. And a lot of times you'll see people who are, particularly women, and you'll see a lot of women who were, say, like prostitutes, or they were, I don't see a lot of murder victims unless there was like unfinished business associated with their murders sticking around. But you'll see that a lot of times once I kind of connect with them and they know that I'm going to tell their story, they can cross. And I've seen it happen. So it's a wonderful gift to have, but it's also a lot of pressure to be like working 3 a.m. and have a woman wearing a nightgown like walk by and like, man, like you need to check in, and she like looks at me like, okay, I'm not actually staying at the hotel. I'm a ghost. Like, oh, okay. It's like trying to differentiate between real people and the spirit realm sometimes was difficult. And I will say that people go, how do you know the difference? And usually if you look down at their feet, you can't actually see their feet if they're ghosts. And sometimes you do, but for this woman, you can just see her dress, but you couldn't see her feet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty interesting that you can't see their feet most of the time. That's an interesting fact.
I know. I mean, I don't know why. I think it's maybe because they manifest from the top. So if you see like a half body like manifestation, it means that they don't have, I guess, enough energy to fully manifest. Because like, a lot of times, like a full body apparition, even if you catch them like a camera, the last thing you're going to look is like, hey, does this person have feet?
Right. Right.
You'll see a lot of times that they're not fully formed.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd rather see a floating head than just 2 pairs of legs running or walking or something.
I know, right?
Yeah, just the disembodied appendages is a little more scary to me than a head.
Yeah, there's the Hawthorne Hotel in Salem. Actually, there's phantom hands. So there's actually disembodied hands that are like in the hall, which I haven't seen, but people have reported that. I'm like, that would be terrifying to see like floating hands in the hallway. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to like the way our brains work as humans. We go off of visual clues of people's like facial expressions. So I think that's why it makes it more scary. If you just see legs or just see hands or something like that, you don't know what the intentions of the apparition is.
Right. I do think that I get so many like messages on like social media, like, hey, is this a ghost? And it's clearly like a bug, or it's clearly like just like a light anomaly.
Right.
And, a lot of times I just kind of like, I'm like, listen, like I see dead people, but I don't really see them in the photos. But I do think a lot of times it's matrixing, like where they actually do, like their brain interprets it as a ghost. And I mean, I apply that to me too. Like I have seen stuff where I'm like, oh, for example, like the man with a hat that I saw with the red glowing eyes. There was an exit sign like right behind it with a red glowing. So in hindsight, I'm like, maybe his glowing eyes were actually the exit sign, like reflecting off the image. I mean, I wanted to be matrixing because it was so terrifying. I'm like, maybe it was the exit sign. And I'm like, and I look and I actually go inside the bookstore and there was like no way it could have been.
Yeah.
But I think our minds do kind of play tricks on us visually, especially.
Yeah, if you get into like the scientific, so just the way that your eye receives light and also how your brain, what they call matrixing or pareidolia, your brain is trying to make sense of something that you can't necessarily make sense of. You can't always trust your eyes. But also at the same time, sometimes you just know what you saw. Like, I've seen apparitions. I'm like, no, that's not my eyes playing tricks on me. That was actually an apparition that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like and some people go like, do you see it in your third eye or do you actually see it? I'm like, I'm to the point now as a clairvoyant where I see both. I mean, I've seen third eye. Like that's how it actually, like my first like visitations, even when I was kind of repressing that ability, I would actually have dreams. The prophetic dreams, the ones that were like paranormal communication or communication with the spirit realm, were different, and they had like a different ethereal feel to it. And then I started actually, when I was writing my books and like talking to them, I'm like, hey, if you're here, I'll, I want to tell your story. And it started to actually develop externally. And so it started off with my third eye, and now I'm full blown. Like I've seen spirits with my eyes, like my actual eyes, and not my third eye.
Yeah.
So I'm even kind of like, cause I didn't really identify as clairaudient, which is where you hear voices. And I've been actually getting like really tuning into that part lately. So that's been interesting. Like hearing like someone like whispering or communicating. I just had a case that I was working on. It was like an attachment case, and the entity was like he was like basically, and he had this like really high pitched squeaky voice, and like this was like the worst voice to pick up on. And it was like he's like, are you gonna effing, like he was using the F word, he's like, are you gonna effing tell him? And I'm like, first of all, like stand back, like you entity. And he was like coming up to me, like swirling around me, like, are you gonna effing tell him? And I'm like, tell him what? Like, and so I'm like communicating like while this guy's attachment was like running around me, like I'm like, oh my god. So yeah, I mean, like the I don't know if I like the clairaudient as much as I like the clairvoyant.
Yeah. There's, I mean, also if you don't see them, you just hear them. That's a little creepier than if you actually see them.
I actually think I started off I was more clairaudient than I was clairvoyant, but the clairaudient it freaked me out more, and I was just like, I don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
So I think I think that like that was probably my first like ability, even as a child. And then it was too creepy for me that I would rather see them than actually hear them. Although I talked to a psychic today, and he's like, the spirits are like telling you that they're trying to communicate to you. And I'm like, I know. Like I've known this for years. And there's a language, and he called it light language. So it's like this other form of communication where they do it in tones, and I get the ear ringing, like high pitched when there's a spirit in the room, and I actually have it right now. So it's like this, like that ringing, you have to like learn how to interpret it. What is the spirit trying to tell you when you hear that high pitched ringing noise?
That's crazy that you say that, because whenever I go investigate a location and it's somewhere that's really active, I will get the ringing, and it's almost like somebody that has tinnitus, like
Right.
ear damage, but it's not. I only have it when I go to these locations, and I don't have a problem with high blood pressure, nothing like that. But as soon as I leave the location, it stops. But it gets stronger as the activity gets stronger. And then, partway through the night, a lot of times the energy will die down and it'll go away. But, yeah, that's crazy that you say that, because I've had that happen so many times, and I've even mentioned it to my partners that I investigate with.
And really, it's like a lot of it, and what the psychic told me, he's actually clairaudient. He was like saying, like, well, they're trying, because he was like talking to the spirits. I'm like, well, tell them I said hello, you're talking to them. And I'm like, and he's like, well, they've been trying to communicate with you. And I'm like, well, I know that they are, because I could sometimes even make out what they're saying. But he was saying that I need to kind of like take the ringing and actually interpret it. Like to meditate on the ringing. If I focus too much on that ringing noise, it'll drive me crazy. But I get what he's saying. It's almost like if you focus on it, you can actually get a message from it. And so like that's, I guess, my next level of development is like to interpret the audio, the clairaudience part of my abilities.
Yeah, and in no way do I believe that I'm a medium or clairvoyant or psychic or anything. I've always been an empath, and so
Right.
just good with energy and living people as well as dead people. And
when we started talking, like I'm connecting with you. So like by connecting with you, I'm actually picking up on your energy, and like that's when my ears started to ring. And so like that to me is a sign that the person that I'm talking to actually is connected to the spirit realm. And so it's a great gift, but like I can also, and they also use that to, people like claim to be empathic or clairvoyant or clairsentient. Like if it's not ringing, I'm like, wait, you're not. Sorry, it's all. But I also think like people that actually investigate, they work that muscle, and I do think we all have abilities. And I think that the ones that, are the ones that are the biggest like detractors, the ones that close themselves off, almost to the point where I closed myself off because I was so scared.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's why people are so skeptical, because they may have had an experience that was so overwhelming that they couldn't handle it, or they can't comprehend it, so they kind of like deny it. And I will say, like by putting up the paranormal blinders for so long, the frequency of the spirit communication was a lot less, but it was like a lot more profound when it did happen, like the hand grabbing my leg. And I, since I've kind of accepted the abilities, I haven't had like that physicality happen where I felt like grabbed or touched. I'd rather see them than like be touched by them. Like that to me, that creeps me out.
Yeah.
Like my leg being grabbed or my shoulders being grabbed or my arms being grabbed. But so the guy that told me today about the ringing, he said that, you're having pains in your shoulder, in your back. And I'm like, I am. And the reason why I am is I actually connected with somebody I was working with on a case that actually is going to be on TV coming up. And I was protecting the person that I was investigating with, because that's what I was supposed to do in the situation, because this person was like in a really bad place. And I took on his pain, and the pain like made me contort. So like a lot of I'm having physical manifestations from being empathic to this person. And, he's like, you just got to cut the cord with this person. And I'm like, I feel like I put that connection up to protect him. And I feel like I still got to kind of protect him. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I also take on people's pain too. And like, that's a lot. Like that, like not only do I, communicate with them, but I also take on their pain. I'm like, oh, this is great. I love it. I love all the spirit communication and now people communication. So I think, as an empath, you probably identify, you feel other people's chaos and their happiness and their sadness. And it almost kind of it's a lot of emotion to handle.
I can relate because of what you're saying about differentiating between what is yours and what is theirs. And with being an empath, yeah, sometimes you take on other people's emotions, especially. And I've never, as far as I know, I've never noticed me taking on anybody else's pain, but other than emotions. But taking on other people's emotions, have to recognize that, that's not my emotion. I'm not angry. I'm not sad. That's because of whatever person's energy. And sometimes that has happened to me out in public. Generally, I kind of keep myself guarded. But sometimes out in public, I get mad for no reason or, upset for no reason. And I'll have to take a step back and be like, look, I was having a good day until this. This is not mine. I just have to let it go.
And a lot of like what I had, like kind of debilitating, like when I was kind of repressing all my gifts at a young age, I would have like panic attacks. And like, even like when I lived in New York City, like I was, first I came, I was like I love the energy in New York City. And then 9/11 happened. And right around that time is when I kind of like had a breakdown, because all the energy associated with 9/11 just was like overwhelmed me as an empath. And once I was like able to separate the other people's emotions and the chaos around me with mine, like it made everything so much easier. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually not having a panic attack. I'm having a empathic, connection attack with the chaos around me. And once I was able to separate that, I was able to, live a more authentic life and not like walk around in fear, because I was a really afraid person for a long time. And once I was able to embrace my gifts, that's when I became less afraid. And that's when the floodgates open with everything, really.
Yeah, I for the longest time in my life, I kind of pushed the empathic stuff away, and I've had paranormal experiences since I was a kid, my entire life, but kind of pushed the empathic stuff away because it made me feel kind of crazy, and I wasn't really surrounded by people who were of like mind. I wasn't going out and investigating and doing the show like I am now and researching. But now that I've found that I've gotten older, I'm just like, yeah, it is what it is. This is me. And so now I've got people around me. Some of my friends might look at me a little crazy, but they believe me because I'll tell them stuff that I shouldn't know, and stuff like that. Right. But yeah, it took me a long time to accept it as well. And just be like, this is what it is. And I can use this to my benefit, or I can be afraid of it and push it away and be miserable because I'm pushing it away and not using this gift that I was given.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that and also the next level for you, and also something that I learned is how to turn it on and turn it off. And I think that once I learned how to turn it off, it made my life so much better. But I'm finding now, like especially when I connect with fellow empaths or fellow, clairvoyants, I turn it on automatically. So it's like sometimes, especially when you're talking about the paranormal, like you have to turn it on.
Right.
But I think learning how to turn it on and turn it off is something that is part of our development. And I think that I can see you, like, are you able to turn it off when you're out in the field?
Yeah, most of the time I'm pretty good at controlling it. Sometimes I let my guard down, and
yeah,
nothing bad has happened to me. It's just kind of overwhelming sometimes if I let my guard down, and I have to take a step back and kind of get it in check.
And also too, you'll find people like us, the entities, both good and bad, will kind of like flock to us, and that means that you really have to work on protection as well. And I've learned the hard way, because I had an attachment that nearly killed me, and it was an 8-day ordeal. And I've seen people who've had attachments for years, so I'm really lucky that I went through the attachment so quickly. But I will say that I now, like, even when I have my guard down, I try to protect as much as I can, because I've had, like we're talking about the hotels that you don't expect to be haunted that are haunted. I've had situations where, like, I was just in Concord, Massachusetts recently, and I saw what looked like a shadow figure, kind of like I was near, like, where the origins of the American Revolution took place, which is North Bridge. And I was just kind of like walking in the park, just feeling the energy. And I see this, like, shadow figure, like, run at me, and then kind of like dissipate into darts. And then the darts were like kind of lunging at me, like I call them paranormal darts. And I posted it on social media, like, has anybody seen this before? And like a lot of people did. And so, yeah, I mean, like I'm like, and I didn't protect myself. And I think that it started to dissipate when I did, because I saw the shadow figure coming at me. Then I put up what I call a crystal shield of protection. And then it kind of dissipated with the crystal shield. So I do think that, like, if I've learned anything, it's like I have to protect myself all the time. if I like leave my home, I have to, like, I have to protect myself and just put up whether a crystal shield or white light of protection, or turn off, or whatever I do, or pray. Prayer is amazing for me. When I pray regularly, I have fewer issues than I do when I forget to pray.
Yeah, I use the white light, especially around my house. I used to have an issue before I learned how to control it better. I would have an issue where I'd be in between awake and asleep. I guess some people would call it, I guess, like a type of astral projection, but I didn't really go anywhere. But I was conscious of my surroundings, and it was almost like there was a line of dead people out of my room and out of my house.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's kind of that was one of the, like, when I just kind of had to accept my ability. So yeah, you have to definitely, like, put the white light up in your home.
Yeah, and I sage on a regular basis as well, just to clear energy in general, just because, we entertain a lot with a lot of our friends, so all the energy kind of stacks up over time, and so you got to kind of get rid of it, or it becomes chaotic. And I think that's part of where you can get poltergeist and things like that just kind of manifest from energy. But yeah, I do a lot, and I practice all the time to protect myself and to block all that out, especially at home, because this is my safe haven, and when I'm going to sleep, now is not the time. And you were saying, kind of being a beacon to spirit. The analogy I always use was a lighthouse in the dark, that you're this kind of, light shining out and they're like, oh, that person, can feel me or see me. Or, yeah.
I want to hang out with that person.
Yeah.
And I think the white light is actually a really good idea, because white light, basically, it actually kicks out both the good and the bad. But I also do a crystal shield, which is, it allows sometimes, like, if I want to communicate with, say, the good spirits, it lets them in and keeps the bad stuff out. So I kind of do like a shield where it's sort of like a force field. So, and then that's kind of advanced, like the crystal shield of protection. But if you really want, like, a sure way to kind of, like, keep your home safe, put up the white light of protection. Sage also, it neutralizes the location, but it also it cleanses everything. Or lemongrass I use. I even, when I had the attachment, I worked with Michael Robichaud, who is a shaman, very gifted shaman, and he had me put like salt and like holy water around my home, and I'm like, okay, but you know what, it worked.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm gonna do my barrier of salt and holy water to protect me, and I also use, because I grew up in the South, like Pensacola, right by Alabama. I use Florida water, and that's kind of like my version of holy water that I use, and it works too. And I use sea salt for certain things. So a lot of what I do is, because having worked in Salem, a lot of it's kind of witchcrafty, but I find whatever works, and I'll use different techniques from different fields to make it work for me.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, from talking to different people and all the different things that people do to protect themselves, like you're talking salt and crystals and all this other stuff. I think it all comes down to intentions. It's what is what is your intention, and if you believe in what you're doing, then I think with the intention and the belief there, I think you put that energy out there that this is my space and I'm protecting it.
Yeah, when I do the crystal shield of protection, I do like a chant, and then I actually learned this from my good friend Dana, who was a witch, and she's like, you know what, I do this crystal shield, try it, tell me if it works, and it works for me. And I've actually had situations where we were out in the field together, and because I channel, and that's something that when I got my attachment, I was actually channeling, and I didn't know how to push it out. So it's something that the spirits, they want me so much that they kind of jump on me and they kind of take me over. So in this situation, I got taken over, and she puts up the shield of protection while I was like, she's like, that's not Sam. Like, what is going on? And she knew something was wrong. So she lifts up the shield of protection, and then the thing bites her. So she got a bite mark, and this is in the middle of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts, with a bite mark on her leg. And after that, I'm like, you know what? Like, I saw that work. I saw like that thing lift from me. I'm going to use it, and I've used it ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it works, for sure. And also seeing it, in practice and kind of taking care of the attachment for you.
Yeah.
One of the questions that's kind of been in my mind, because you do live in the Salem area and kind of in New England. I'm from the Nashville area, and we around here, of course we have a long history, but not quite as long as like New England. Around here, it's a lot of more Civil War stuff. But there you have the American Revolution and like the founding of our country, and people have been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so you've got this book coming out, Ghosts of the American Revolution. So as a clairvoyant, what is it like to live somewhere like that with so much history and so many, I know there's dead people everywhere.
Yeah.
But, such a long history of death and tragedy and curses and witches and, all of this high strangeness and supernatural stuff.
I love it. I mean, knowing that my family they're actually originally from Rhode Island, like the Portsmouth, Rhode Island area. So knowing that, like, I came from New England, it completely makes me love, like I feel like I'm connecting to my family when I'm here. And my family, the good and the bad, the ones that executed innocent men and women for witchcraft, and also the ones that were American Revolutionary War heroes, like Israel Putnam, who was the general during the American Revolution, actually is one of my relatives too. So I have both good and bad people in my lineage. The man that raised me, my stepfather, his name's Paul, and he was a history teacher, an historian, and I grew up loving history. So like coming here and being able to really immerse myself into the history first, and then also immerse myself into the ghost lore, really has made me appreciate who I am and what New England is about. And I think that the Ghost of the American Revolution book was a good example of me using my clairvoyant abilities as an author, because a lot of these stories have been told over and over again. I do feature like George Washington, but I try to give a different side to George Washington in my book. And I did trace Ben Franklin's steps in Philadelphia. And a lot of people don't realize that Ben Franklin actually was originally from Boston, and then he lived in Philadelphia. But his ghost has been spotted a lot in Philadelphia, and I kind of went to all these locations hoping to see him. And I go to what was his home like the relics of his home. So it's kind of encased in glass, right outside of the Ben Franklin Museum. And I look down and like to the glass, and you can see like a dirt floor, and I'm like, wow, what is that over there? And it turns out they said it was the privy. And I mean, I know that the privy is the bathroom or the toilet, but I heard this voice behind me go, like, kind of like jokingly say, oh, that's where George Washington relieved himself. And he actually used more crass words than that, but we'll repeat it. But I turned around and there was nobody there. And I like, do I think that was Ben Franklin? I do. Cause like he was a jokester. And he was like, "Oh, that's Ben Franklin," blah blah blah. And so I loved it. I loved going to all these locations. I really did a good. What I feel about the book. I turned it in right when the COVID hit. So it's been a long time since I actually worked on the research. But I was like, by the time the lockdown happened, I traveled all over New England and to all these American Revolution locations like Philadelphia and New York City and in Boston and went to some of these amazing locations right before. So I was lucky that I did that, and I can't wait for the book to come out. They keep pushing it. It was supposed to come out actually this past year, but because of COVID, my publishing house closed. They were closed for about 6 months. So the new date is November 1st for the new release for Ghosts of the American Revolution. And I can't wait for you guys to read it, because what I really focused on were people that are marginalized. So whether it's people of color who, we always read about like white rich guys and
right.
and what about the enslaved people who are still lingering and want their stories to be told? I have a whole section on horse ghosts, and the galloping ghosts of the American Revolution still linger with like Paul Revere and other locations throughout, mainly Massachusetts, but other locations too. And I really had fun with this book, and I had fun with the history and sort of painting a different side to American history. And I really did focus on the Loyalists, the other side, the British, more than I thought I would. And the Oliver House, which is in Middleborough, Massachusetts, is a major player in the book. And that's where that was a Loyalist stronghold. Sally Hutchinson was the lady of the house, and her father was the governor, the Loyalist governor of Massachusetts. And she's, her spirit's still at the Oliver House, and really connecting with her and what happened to the women that were in the house when the Sons of Liberty came and ransacked it and like basically destroyed her home. It was important for me to tell all sides of the story.
Yeah, I look forward to reading it. I love history as well, and I love talking to guests like you who dive into the history and not just the haunting stuff, because I think that and I've said this many times here, and my audience is probably getting tired of me talking about it, but the history as a paranormal investigator and researcher is very important to understand where the hauntings came from and why they're there. And also it can help you further tell the story, like you were talking about with, the spirits coming to you, they want their story told. And by knowing the history, it can help you further tell their story.
Yeah. And I get from like some diehard paranormal investigators. They're like, like you need to go in cold and like read the go. And I do. I mean, actually, sometimes I find locations like Fort Mifflin as a player in my Ghost American Revolution book. I didn't really know Fort Mifflin. Now I know it very well because I've been several times. But I didn't know the history, and I had a lot of experiences at Fort Mifflin. And it has like a lot of American Revolutionary War history and Civil War history as well, and a lot of death associated with it. So what I do is I try to go to a location, if possible, cold, without knowing the history, and then I get communication from the spirits, and then I dig for the history to back up the stories. And like that's kind of been my approach. And when I first started writing books, it was kind of the opposite. I would know the history coming in, and then talk to people who have paranormal experiences to add to the history. And now that I'm finding that I'm the primary communicator in my book, so it's basically like a clairvoyant travel guide with an emphasis on history. It's like the best of both worlds. I don't really think that we've seen that really. I mean, like I think that people when they read my book, they're expecting it to be either like a just purely ghost or like really scary, which unfortunately, my books, I would not call them scary. I would call them more historical, interesting, like strange history and that sort of thing. And so if you're expecting to be scared when you read my books, you probably won't be scared, but you'll be educated and you'll learn a lot about history that you didn't, and without even realizing you're learning. And
Right.
my first, like, my intentions have always been to write history books with ghost stories, and that's still my motivation. I just feel like that the ghost stories actually kind of have taken on a new life, now that I'm kind of using my abilities in the books and kind of talk about what I experienced along the way.
Yeah, and in a way, the ghosts that you come in contact with are the continued living history of that. So, for me to come into contact with somebody like Ben Franklin or George Washington or a ghost of that caliber, I think would just be amazing.
It really is cool, and people are like, well, do you think that Ben Franklin is a disembodied soul on the on the land? And I'm like, I think he visits, and I think he may visit someone like me because I'm about to write a book about him, and I think
Right.
that I don't think that spirits are, some of them are disembodied souls where they're stuck on, because they have unfinished business. But I think that someone like Ben Franklin or I didn't really communicate with George Washington, but I did. I felt a strong connection to his mother, Mary Washington, and she has her residence there. And I think that I kind of go with the flow. So whatever spirits want for me to talk to, I usually I'm like, what, Mary Washington, you're better than George Washington because you're the mother, so I'm going to talk to you. So yeah, I mean, I think that I just kind of go with the flow, and I'm surprised sometimes the big names do show up, and I'm surprised sometimes that it leads me into a completely different direction, and I uncover history that may have been forgotten. And a good example for that is like really focusing on the people of color. And I think that like a lot of the people of color that are featured in my book were, I think they've been overlooked. And I think by kind of I went to Swansea's Tavern in New York City, and there was a woman who came to me, and she was an African-American woman. And it turns out actually she was not Revolutionary War. She was murdered years after the American Revolution, but she was a famous opera singer. And, to be able to kind of like communicate with this woman and not be like what I was expecting at a location known for its American Revolutionary War history was awesome.
Yeah. And like you said, Ghost of the American Revolution will be out in November, and you're producing the show A Haunting. Do you have any other projects coming up here soon?
Yeah, so the Haunted Hotels in New England, it was a podcast so I wrote the book during COVID, released it. I'm also re-releasing my book called The 13 Most Haunted in Massachusetts, but I'm actually revising the list and calling it Mass Hauntings. And that should come out probably like later this summer. So even before my Ghost of the American Revolution book. And then I'm doing it. I have worked on a podcast called Haunted Hotels with Sam Baltrusis, and that I've already interviewed a ton of people for this podcast show, but it's actually the group that is producing it. They have a deal with My Entertainment, which is Zach Bagan's production group. So they're kind of, because it's such a good podcast, they're kind of like going through all the marketing channels. So I don't know when that's going to come out. I just know that it's going to have a lot of marketing behind it because it's like a Zach Bagan's project, and it's a radio show, and I love radio. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm just not sure when that's going to come out, but stay tuned. It should come out soon.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Looking forward to listening to it. Of course, being a podcaster, I listen to lots of podcasts. One of the other things that we didn't get into today, but I have to have you back on, we'll have to talk about it, is I'm a huge true crime nerd as well.
Yeah.
And you've got some books, 13 Most Haunted Crime Scenes Beyond Boston. And then you've got the Mass Murders book. I love when the paranormal and the true crime cross over, and there's not a lot of authors out there doing that. And so I love when I find those books. So those two books I'm definitely going to read of yours here soon. And we'll have to have you back on and just talk true crime and paranormal.
I'm gonna drop another bomb. So yeah, I'm definitely going in that direction, the true crime direction. And I did film a show that's true crime related. I did a shock doc. I filmed it actually in February. We couldn't talk about it for months, but it should be coming out in August. And it's related to one of my relatives, and Lizzie Borden. So we actually do revisit the Lizzie Borden case, and I use my clairvoyant lens to hopefully give my cousin justice, postmortem justice. I do think she did commit the murders, but I tried my best to tell her story and tell her story correctly.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll be looking forward to that. Do you know where it's going to be coming out?
Yeah, so it's a shock doc, and it's going to be on Discovery Plus and also the Travel Channel. So I would just check up on my website, sambaltrusis.com, and as soon as we're able to publicize the shock doc, then we will. I'll post a link on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today and chatting with me. I've had a good time.
All right, thanks a lot, Eric.
All right, and Sam Baltrusis, like you said, you can go to his website, sambaltrusis.com. You can find all of his books on Amazon. Go check them out. They're awesome. I look forward to reading some more of those and all the projects he's got coming up. As always, thanks y'all for joining us today. Stay safe out there. See you later. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
As if I even